Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm very pleased to be sitting up here with Senator Weinberg to my immediate left and John Paff. I'm sure you recognize the names, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about them from what I know from my experience with working with them. Senator Weinberg is, I think she's the foremost legislator in the state in terms of promoting open government. She, along with John Paff, she pioneered OPRA in terms of revamping the legislation, creating a new legislative environment for OPRA. And for the last couple of years, she's been advancing amendments to both the Open Public Records Act and to the Open Public Meetings Act. Especially with respect to the Meetings Act, we think these amendments would really bring the Meetings Act into the 21st century. I know it sounds a little cliche, but the Meetings Act was passed in 1974, and it still has a lot of antiquated references, and it hasn't been updated or overhauled since that time. So, Senator Weinberg has been the foremost, I don't want to equivocate, she's been the foremost advocate for both transparency and really updating New Jersey's open government laws. So really they keep pace with both developments in technology and developments in the law. As you know, seated to her immediate left is John Paff. For many years now, I think John Paff has been the foremost citizen advocate in New Jersey. It's not his profession. I think he calls it his calling or his avocation. His avocation in New Jersey is to pursue open government, and he does that by submitting OPRA requests, by essentially auditing or checking public agencies to see if they're complying with the law. I personally know John to be a very sophisticated advocate for open government. He's not just familiar with the Records Act and the Meetings Act, but he's also familiar with ethics rules, both ethics rules regarding attorneys and ethics rules regarding public officials. He uses those rules and the statutes very effectively in order to advocate for transparency. He's nonpartisan in the sense that no one is above him filing a complaint, whether it's a Meetings Act complaint or an ethics complaint, and he's constantly searching for truth, I think, for its own sake, and for there to be greater openness in government. I think he's seen and uncovered firsthand, whether it's police misconduct through lawsuits and settlements that he exposes to the public, or just a lack of transparency among certain government actors. He also uses the court system very effectively to advance transparency, both through the Open Public Records Act and less often through the Meetings Act. And I think we need more like him. I think John, and one of the things about John that strikes me is that he's very fair. He'll frequently blog about what he finds in the press, and I don't think he's ever unfair or vindictive about what he finds. He's very truthful, and he also does an excellent job of showing. If he says something, he'll give you a link to the document where he found the information, and that it's a non-partisanship and a non-vindictiveness that's sort of increasingly absent today. So with those introductions, I'd like to give the floor to Senator Weinberg, hear her thoughts. I expect that she'll talk about the current round of potential amendments to the Open Public Records Act and the Open Public Meetings Act, and I'll hand you the mic, although I think in this room you may not need it, but I'll give you the option.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I think you summed up my friend John Paff quite well. It's funny, probably there are many philosophic things that we don't agree on, but what we do agree on, and it is so important, is government transparency. And if we can really guarantee that at every level of government here in our state, the rest of it is going to flow, because I have confidence in the citizens, in the electorate, and the people who are out there watching or have vested interests to watch. We are in the process, and it's been a very long and, I must tell you, painful process to bring both the Open Public Records Act and the Open Public Meetings Act into the 21st century. As was pointed out, OPMA was, in particular, was written before there was any internet. People had never, it didn't exist, or Al Gore had not yet invented it for us. So to say that these bills are way out of date is an understatement. But it is really difficult dealing not only with my other 79 and the 80 colleagues in the Assembly and the 40 colleagues in the Senate, but the groups out there, the League of Municipalities, the Municipal Clerks Organization, mostly, and local municipal officials. And I will share with you some of the roadblocks, and then I can go over the bills in more detail if you're interested. But as I just explained, if you just mention Open Public Records or Open Public Meetings Act to a municipal official, they get apoplectic. And the conversation becomes immediately, from their point of view, an argument. And when I try to sort out to them, that is the current law, you've been living under that for 30 years or 20 years or 10 years, and we are in many ways trying to make things better for people. And some of what I think from the public officials' point of view that we put into these bills to help them is, for instance, when a business makes an open public records request that is clearly for the use of the business. Most famous, at least that I constantly hear about, happened in, I think, in Fairlawn. The local pet stores went in and asked for a list of all the dog licenses, obviously to be used as a marketing tool for them. That is not what OPRA was designed for. But we're not going to prevent it, but we are allowing, if it is a for-profit business that is using it for a business, we will allow the municipality to charge in real time to gather those lists for that business. That's a positive for them, which I think is important. We, in the state, will put up a website for so that any community that doesn't have its own website to put the ordinary documents, contracts, bill lists, budgets, online. The state will undertake setting up that website, and each town can then have its own portal on the website at no charge to the municipality. Something else we thought we were doing to help the communities. We are giving to the communities, with all due respect, and John certainly doesn't fall into this category, but every town, or a lot of towns, seem to have somebody who does nothing but make OPRA requests. For, again, no particular discernible reason. It's their pastime or whatever. I mean, I've had one small town in the district that I represent actually come in with a suitcase full of these. That somebody just did 20, 30, 40 a week. So we are giving the communities a way to go into court, just like a frivolous lawsuit, to say this OPRA requester, this is a frivolous request now, and we seek a way to get out of it or to not respond to all of these. So that's a third good thing that I think we're giving to the municipalities. What we do in the Open Public Meetings Act is we have given a definition and expanded what a public body is, and we've included organizations like the League of Municipalities, the New Jersey Associations of School Athletics, the School Boards Association. Those are included now under our new bill. They're not happy about that, but they get a major part of their funding is public money. So they are included. We've expanded the definition. We've expanded the definition of the word meeting to include subcommittee meetings. This is a very interesting aspect of the bill. We have found, and I think John will back me up, more and more municipalities doing business by subcommittee. In other words, a group of less than an effective majority, a committee that really can't do independent action. But they are also not bound by the Open Public Meetings Act. So more and more municipalities, I believe, have been using this in order to get around OPMA. And they, for instance, will, and I'm just making up something here, they'll go out, they form a redevelopment subcommittee, less than an effective majority. They go out, they interview potential developers, they decide the corner of Jones and Smith is going to be up for redevelopment, and they get all of this in place and then make one report to the council. And let's pick Mr. Brown as the developer. He's going to redevelop the corner of Jones and Smith, and it's all over and done with before anybody has had a chance to blink. And no member of the public has the ability to view what's going on in those meetings. So this has become one of the biggest bones of contention between my office, I guess, as the prime sponsor and the League of Municipalities. We negotiated this portion. We started out by saying subcommittees have to keep minutes, and there was a huge hue and cry that'll mean everybody's going to have to hire staff to take minutes at a subcommittee meeting. Of course, this is patently ridiculous. You can record them and just make a couple of notes. But so we negotiated it back to subcommittees are open or closed. The council makes the decision. But they must report quarterly, either orally or in writing, to the governing body of what they're doing, how many meetings they've had, and what it entails. I actually had members of the Clerks Association complain about that because it will cause extra work. So I said, how could this possibly cause extra work? They're going to have to make a note in the minutes that the subcommittee chair came to report to the municipality. That's the extra work. Whatever this does to enhance the minutes. The municipalities, on the other hand, complained because they don't want to have to vote. They just want it automatic that subcommittees are closed. They do not want to have to cast a vote, which puts them in front of the public as saying our subcommittees will be closed to the public. So those are the kinds of issues that we're fighting through right now. So I think that kind of sums up, not in great detail, but some of the things we're dealing with in the OPMA bill. In the Open Public Records bill, we've again expanded the definition of a government record to include a wider class of documents required by law to be kept on file. We were very careful about privacy concerns, though we are allowing municipalities to remove email addresses, cell phones, obviously social security numbers when lists like that are released. Certainly anybody under 18, if they've signed up for recreation programs, those emails, cell phones should never be released to the public. So we're trying to be sensitive to the practicalities of this. We are allowing records custodians, usually the municipal clerk, to name, to kind of deputize another record custodian so that the municipal clerk might not be responsible for getting a police department record, as a for instance. So then the municipal clerk doesn't really have the power to get it, but they're getting badgered to get the record. So if the municipal clerk deems it so, they can deputize a separate records custodian for the police department or the records or the recreation department, which will be clear to the public and hopefully would lessen the workload for municipal clerks who might not really have the power to get the record back. I'm sort of going back and forth between OPMA and OPRA, but also in OPMA, we're very careful about giving public notice for items to be added to the agenda. And we see this all the time, that some important item gets added to the agenda the night of the council meeting, and the public has had no advance notice. So if there is an emergency, there is built in an emergency procedure, obviously, to be able to add something. But otherwise, we're looking at that 48-hour notice very carefully. In the OPRA bill, we also kind of changed a little bit the makeup of the Government Records Council, the infamous Government Records Council, which we have never gotten any really good suggestions on how to improve it. But in the OPRA bill, there will be 4 public members nominated by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate, 1 person with some news media expertise, 1 member of the Municipal Clerks Association, and a member of the New Jersey Press Association, with experience with state government as records custodians. So we think we're going to make the GRC into a committee that really kind of understands the ins and outs of open public records and open public meetings. May I say, by the way, the New Jersey Press Association has been a great partner in this, as the ACLU has, along with the Foundation for Open Government. They have been willing to make the compromises that we have to make to try to get the 21 votes in the Senate, 41 votes in the Assembly, and 1, as we say, in order to get a law passed in New Jersey, 21 in the Senate, 41 in the Assembly, and 1 governor to sign the bill. And until we get to that magic number, this is going to continue to be a heavy lift. We are going to try to do this in the fall, probably around October, November. I am going to need a lot of input from citizens to their own legislators, to their own senators and their own assembly people in order to garner the votes for this. Pardon me, I've had a long day in Trenton and obviously been talking too much, which some people are not happy about, but I'm determined to get this passed. And I, along with my staff, 2 members of my legislative staff are here, Shane Mitchell, who has been living and breathing this bill for almost as long as I have, and Tony Bonades, who's the Assistant Legislative Director. We are really all devoted to bringing OPRA and OPMA into the 21st century and to make sure that the public knows I tell my colleagues, the public can be very annoying. I'd be the first to tell you that. But that's the business we're in. The public owns everything we do. They own the buildings in which we operate. They own the copy machines that enable me to copy these documents. They own the telephones that we speak on. And if only I can get that mental outlook into, all the rest of my colleagues will be fine. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of dedication. This won't be an easy lift. But hopefully with the Foundation for Open Government and with people like John, who consistently push the envelope a bit, we're going to get there. But the big issues, subcommittees, sale of lists for business purposes, being able to go into court on really frivolous OPRA requests, and establishing a state website for municipalities, and getting the municipalities to the stage, if the regular documents, as I said, budgets, their contracts and so on, are just scanned and put online, they won't be dealing that much with the public, because you will all have access to these documents, and you can do it all by yourself whenever you want. So that's the goal here. And one other thing, I'm looking at my own notes here. We also tell members of a public body that they are not allowed to communicate with each other via cell phones during a public meeting. They can communicate with staff if they need to get an answer, or their town attorney. But I have sat at public meetings, municipal, in my own town, and know that this guy at the end is telling this guy at the other end via the cell phone, I'm going to vote yes, you vote no. And it's a communication tool that should not be used, particularly in front of the public at a public meeting. So that's another little thing that we wrote into here. We keep fee shifting in the OPRA bill. We've added it into the OPMA bill. I'm sure that's going to be a big bone of contention. So whether it stays in there or not, I can't guarantee it. But it's there now. So that's kind of the overview. I don't know if you want me to just pass on to John, and then we'll hopefully have a nice discourse with all of you.
Appreciate everyone showing up tonight. As far as the bills go, they're good bills. I think they, of course, could be better, but they're definitely a step in the right direction. The biggest problem, the biggest thing that the biggest, most important thing is the fee shifting in the OPMA. Currently, there is fee shifting in OPRA. If anybody gets denied a record from a custodian and that custodian is wrong, you can go to an attorney, and there are attorneys who will typically take these cases so that you, as the requester, are not responsible for any cost or attorney's fees. The attorney thinks the case is a winner, they'll take the case to court or the GRC, and they will get their fees. If they get any at all, they'll get them from the custodian or the government agency that hires a custodian. This is a hugely powerful tool, and if it wasn't for this mandatory fee shifting in OPRA, I would not be able to have brought these cases. For instance, in Paff versus Galloway, Walter was able to handle it. We lost at the trial on the appellate level on something as simple as extracting an email log from the email server, a task that took 1 to 2 minutes for the IT guy to complete. And the appellate division, we went that high, and they said, no, you don't get this. This is not a public record. It took us going to the Supreme Court. Now, I'm just an average citizen. If I didn't have the ability, I could not afford it. No individual could reasonably be expected. It's not commercially reasonable for any person to spend, in this case, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And incidentally, I feel sorry for the people of Galloway Township because they ended up paying all that money. But to fight something that I think should have been more easily resolved. But the municipalities and the school boards, they push back. And I remember the pre-OPRA days where under the right to know law, we were only entitled to a $500 attorney fee. And if and only if the custodian, you actually had to get a court order, not a settlement, not a concession, but a court order requiring you to get the record. And the municipalities used to simply ignore right to know law requests. That's just their standard. They simply would not respond to records requests. The only thing that makes them respond now, I don't think they've changed that much. I don't think they've found religion and said, we really are big believers in open government now. I think they recognize that the sting of having to pay attorney's fees, not only their own, but also the requested attorney's fees, keep them in line. And if it wasn't for that, OPRA would just be essentially a dead letter that only the wealthy could afford to enforce, or people who have the skill sets to be able to maintain pro se lawsuits, which most people do not. That's the problem with the OPMA. Right now, it doesn't matter how right I could be about Town X and how wrong they are. If I bring that action, my attorney's fees are paid for by me, their attorney's fees are paid for by them. And people call me on the phone all the time, and they say, you won't believe what my township council just did. And I'll say, try me, I think I'll probably believe it. And they'll have committed an egregious violation of the Open Public Meetings Act, and then they sort of hesitate, thinking that I'm going to say something like, well, there's somebody you can call in Trenton. This is going to be taken care of for you. I'm really glad you put this out. Well, what I have to tell these people is that it doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is whether you have the wherewithal to enforce this. Are you going to file a complaint in Superior Court to get an injunction or to set aside whatever the governing body did at the meeting that violated OPRA or OPMA? Are you actually going to do this? Because there's no one else that's going to do it for you. You're on your own. And if you win and you hire an attorney, you're not going to recover your attorney's fees. Now the towns, they know this. They are very painfully aware, they're gleefully aware of the fact that most citizens are not able to bring complaints in Superior Court. They simply can't afford to. It's not reasonable to expect one citizen or a group of citizens to go against their municipal government or school board and say, you're not keeping your meeting minutes correctly. So, New Jersey Foundation for Open Government, we have actually been litigating some of these cases, the OPMA cases in Mercer County. And we were sort of hoping that what would happen would be that we would get a ruling from the judge in Mercer, Judge Jacobson, Mary Jacobson. We were hoping that we would be able to say, here is what Judge Jacobson said in Town A. Then we could take that order and we could send it to all the other towns in Mercer County, and we could say to them, well, you know, if you're doing the same thing that Town A did, and the same thing that Judge Jacobson said that you can't do, if you're doing that, you should stop doing that because we could sue you too. And probably Judge Jacobson is going to say, well, that's the same thing that Town A did, so I'm going to tell you to stop doing it too. You would think that's how it would work, but we have found that a lot of towns and a lot of school boards aren't impressed by that argument. They recognize the expense that they can impose upon us by simply ignoring the law. And they can say, oh, you want to sue us? Go ahead and sue us because we'll bet you're going to run out of money before we do. Because we have an inexhaustible supply of taxpayers. Those annoying public people, the ones that pay for everything, we can always go after them and tax them to pay to keep you at bay. And they are almost that brazen about it. So what I would like to say, and I'll talk about OPMA, about some of the things that the Senator said and why they're important, but if the attorney fee shifting provision does not get through, it'll simply be another set of rules that people will feel free to ignore because there's no reasonable enforcement mechanism. That's the problem. So
OPRA is almost self-correcting. Through litigation, it develops areas of case law will say, well, this is what a criminal investigative record is. This is what this exemption means. Because there's a lot of litigation because people can afford to bring it. Under the OPMA, there's only a handful of cases that actually have extrude some of the more elementary provisions of the OPMA because nobody can afford to bring the lawsuits. So I would even say that it'd be better to have no changes to the OPMA, keep it exactly like it is, as long as we get the fee shifting provision. It would be better than getting the changes the senator is proposing, but not getting the fee shifting provision, because people cannot be expected to spend thousands of dollars to enforce a law to make their government comply. And it is true that they do abuse. There are towns and school boards that do abuse, especially the agenda thing is terrible. There is nothing that requires them to fix an agenda and say, we have to stick to these 5 items on this agenda, and we can't do, and the towns even have a name for it. They call it a late starter. That's something, and I'll tell you how it works, at least in my experience how it works, is I'm not going to mention any towns, but there'll be a hot button issue that a bunch of citizens in towns, or I don't care, it could be development, it could be anything, that they really care deeply about. And the agenda will not be released to the residents only until the moment the meeting is called. So when you show up at the meeting, the agendas, these are the agendas the members of the governing body probably had for 3 days, 4 days to review. You're now given an agenda, and the public is supposed to digest this agenda and be able to figure out what to ask questions about on a document that they've only seen a moment before the meeting begins. That's, first off, that's not fair. They should share that agenda with members of the public so people can go back to their homes. They can read it, they can talk to their neighbors, they can come back with cogent questions and comments, they can do research, and then they can say, well, this is why I have a position for or against agenda item A1. They are being denied that. In some cases, what will happen is they won't put the hot button item on the agenda, and they'll read the room. You see, now imagine yourself being the activist, the citizen that wants to get the neighbors and everybody down. You're making the phone call, you're sending the emails, you have it on Facebook. You got to show up at the town council meeting tonight because this might come up. So you get 40 people in the audience. The mayor decides, well, we're just going to table this. We're not going to discuss this issue that you're all here to discuss and you want us to vote on. They're going to wear you out. They're going to wait until the next meeting. Maybe you're going to get 30. Next meeting, you're going to get 15. Finally, you're going to get 5 diehards. The rest of you are saying, we're tired of showing up at these meetings in self-defense when we don't know what's going to be on the agenda, and they decide never to talk about it. That's the meeting where they're going to pull the trigger, and they're going to vote in what they want. And that is just game playing. That is not open government. That is a punch in the nose. So we need to fix an agenda of what it is we're going to be talking about. So you're busy people. We're all busy people. If the item that I don't think is interesting is not, if I know that it's not going to be on the agenda, well, then I can stay home and watch football or do something that's meaningful or something I'd rather do than go to a public meeting to not hear. But a lot of people have to show up at these meetings out of self-defense because they're worried that something might be put on the agenda and they're going to miss the discussion. As far as the subcommittee issues is concerned, huge problem. If you read the preamble of the OPMA strikes me as a bill that was written one way and then it got tweaked here and got tweaked there and it got kind of, and it kind of got derailed here and a little bit there. But the preamble says that it's vital to democracy. It is absolutely critical to democracy that an informed public gets to be able to look and witness, this is almost a direct quote, the deliberations and policy formulations of what's going on with local legislation. They're supposed to see Councilman A say, I think this is the good reason, this is the reason why I support the bill, and Councilwoman B saying, well, no, here's why. The policy formulation, the nuts and bolts, the context, that's what the OPMA was intended to guarantee the public. With the subcommittees, everything is shuttled off to a subcommittee that is not accountable to the public. There's no public meetings of the public. These are closed meetings. You'll have a 7-member council, you have 3 of them. They'll hash out all the details at this subcommittee meeting. They'll come back with a recommendation, and it is voted on 7-0, with no discussion. And then all the committees do this. And then you end up where, well, I don't use pejorative language, but a dog and pony show sort of fits this. The council meetings consist of a flag salute, a call to order. It assists of giving a fireman a plaque, and then you congratulate a few Boy Scouts, and then you get to,
Take up as much time.
and then at that point, all the people who are there to photograph the Boy Scouts and the firemen, they all leave the room, and then you have report, all in favor, aye, report, all in favor, aye, report, all in favor, aye. Move to go into closed session, that might last 90 minutes, and then adjourn. That's what a public meeting is. That is not what the legislature, that's not what Byron Baer had in mind when he wrote the Open Public Meetings Act in 1975. That is not what it was supposed to be. But again, the main point that I want to drive home is that absent the attorney fee shifting provision, mandatory fee shifting provision, because government can always come up with a good faith, colorable good faith basis for why they did what they did. You have to have it where they know that if they get sued and their process is changed because of a lawsuit, even if they agree afterwards, well, we're going to change now that you filed a lawsuit, they're still in the hook for attorney's fees. If they know that that is the absolute positive result of what's going to happen, they're going to stop the bad behavior. Nothing short of that will stop them. So when you're talking to your legislators, as the Senator suggests, just say that no matter what you do, don't take out the mandatory fee shifting provision in the OPMA, because if that happens, the whole thing basically just turns into another semi-enforceable, maybe enforceable type of a statute. It won't have the teeth that I think the people of New Jersey deserve. Thank you.
I mean, I'll speak briefly about some of the things we've heard. I mean, one of the, Senator Weinberg described the GRC as the infamous GRC. I think the biggest problem with the GRC is they simply take too long to make their decisions. I can bring a case in trial court, in Superior Court, and we can get a decision in 3 to 6 months. And then if it's appealed to the appellate division, then you add 12 to 18 months. And in the rare case where it goes to Supreme Court, then you add, another 12 to 18 months. But, it's not uncommon for me to have cases from the GRC that are from 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. Now, those examples aren't common, but what happens is a case may be filed with the Government Records Council, and then they refer it to the Office of Administrative Law for a hearing, then it goes back to the GRC, and then sometimes if I'm lucky, it'll get referred back to the OAL for analysis of a second level or second set of issues. I think the GRC's opinions are unnecessarily long. I think they don't contain a tremendous amount of detail that's helpful. I think that there's an absence of people who are familiar with litigation, who were either on staff or on the council. I think if you want to see how a public entity moves through a lot of cases, and you can look to Superior Court. And I think that a lot of the OPRA cases, and I try to read a lot of the GRC opinions. A lot of the GRC opinions are pretty straightforward. You're not getting a Paff v. Galloway situation with the GRC for the most part, where it's sort of a novel issue. I think most of the GRC cases are pretty straightforward. So I'd love to see more of a less opinion generating and more just sort of case management from the GRC. Because you want to see those cases move along a little faster. It's an interesting environment. If you talk to attorneys who represent plaintiffs in the GRC and attorneys who represent public entities before the GRC, no one's happy. So that sort of tells you something. But I do think that changes do need to be made. In terms of the amendment, the section of the amendment that would give public agencies a cause of action against folks who file frivolous OPRA requests, I call that abuse of OPRA. I think it's a little dangerous. I think you have to be very careful with that, because I think that there are some towns who will use that in close cases. Where maybe someone's making a lot of OPRA requests, maybe it's justified, maybe it isn't, but I think that that's going to have a chilling effect. And I think that as we move forward with the amendments, I think we have to consider what type of chilling effect it might have if folks know they might get sued. And then on top of it, if you get sued for abuse of OPRA, can you then recover your attorney's fees if the town is not successful? Because even, just the, like I said, the threat of having this lawsuit against you for abuse of OPRA, that in and of itself is chilling, or potentially chilling. Now, someone were to come, I mean, then you start to get into some interesting litigation strategies. So for example, I've had this happen to me where someone was sued for abuse of OPRA. The town, I think some folks here will know what the town is, but I won't name it.
Might be someplace near where I live.
It might. So the town sued my client for abuse of OPRA. They wanted to restrain him from filing any additional OPRA requests, among other relief. And then we counterclaimed because he did have a lot of outstanding OPRA requests, and I sort of picked the ones that were wrongful denials, and I counterclaimed on those, and I defeated the town's attempt to get an injunction, and then I won on my counterclaims. So the town ended up, now this is all on appeal, but the town ended up being liable to us. The town as plaintiff ended up being liable to us as the OPRA defendant for counsel fees because we both successfully warded off their attempt to get the injunction, and we had some OPRA requests that either they ended up giving us the records during the course of the litigation or we settled favorably. So I think that if towns are given an abuse of OPRA cause of action, you're going to get some interesting back and forth, you're going to get some interesting counterclaims to maybe level the playing field, and I don't know, I mean, my theory has always been, if someone's making a lot of OPRA requests, and I made this argument in
What's a lot?
Well, a lot depends on the size of the town. DEP processes something like, I don't know, 5 or 7 or 10,000 OPRA requests a month. So it's almost impossible to overwhelm a state agency, I think. If you've got a small to medium-sized town, it depends. I think, and I'm kind of constrained from using a specific number because, like I said, I'm litigating this issue. I think that the burden is on both the requester and the clerk to work together. I think that if you have a breakdown of communication, then you'll get litigation. And I think that's part of what happened in this town. There's a breakdown of communication. But my response to all this is NJFOG 4718-5, I think it's G, which gives a records custodian the power to deny a request if a request, or maybe a series of requests, would substantially disrupt the operations of the agency, and the records requester and the records custodian are unable to reach a reasonable accommodation. So, my view is that the law already covers the abuse of OPRA scenario, because then the records custodian can simply deny the request. Say, oh, you've hit me with 100 OPRA requests in 4 days, and each of them has 7 subparts. And you've refused to, hypothetically, negotiate these with me, so I'm just going to deny all of them. And if you want to go to court and challenge it, that's fine, but I'm going to argue that my denial was reasonable because you've overwhelmed us with too many OPRA requests. So it's just food for thought. I do worry that if the amendment is passed and that specific cause of action is given, number one, there'll be a chilling effect. Number two, some folks will get sued. I don't think it'll be a lot, maybe 10, 20, 30 new lawsuits a year. And then some of those folks will default, and then we might have some unforeseen consequences. So I think it's a bit of a hammer. I'm not sure if we need the hammer, but again, I know, Senator, that sort of abuse of OPRA claim, that's one piece of many pieces, and you're dealing with multiple parties. So I do appreciate that it's really the amendments are really a mosaic, and I think they're trying to achieve a certain balance. So my thoughts are given knowing that you are trying to achieve a certain balance among many different interest groups. So I guess I would temper my comments with that. One issue that hasn't come up so far tonight is criminal investigatory records. And my recollection of the amendments is that they sort of keep the status quo. But right now, there's an interesting flux in New Jersey when it comes to criminal investigatory records. In the last 18 months, we've had a series of court decisions, one from the Supreme Court, Lyndhurst, another, Paff versus Ocean County Prosecutor's Office, where essentially in terms of criminal investigatory records and dash cam videos, they're not subject to OPRA if they relate to a criminal investigation. So I don't know if that's something that's going to stay the same under the law, but I think there's a lot of good reasons why you would want dash cam videos to be subject to OPRA, even if they relate to a criminal investigation. Where we're starting to see a dichotomy right now is body cams. And it's fascinating because body cams that police officers may wear can actually be much more revealing than dash cams. With dash cams, they only point in one direction, right? Although, I mean, they also capture the seat, the back seat, if there's guests in the back seat of the car. But for the most part, they just point forward. So if it's a chase, you see the action. If it's DUI, you see the action, unless the officer goes off to the side. But for body cams, they follow all the action. So recently, in my capacity as doing this as an attorney, private attorney, we had a case in Mercer County where we argued that body cam audio and video recordings are required by law to be made, maintained, or kept on file by the police, because there's an Attorney General directive that requires them to do so. And Mercer County Judge Jacobson, for me before, agreed with me. So now we have, and this is only a trial court decision. I don't know if there's going to be appeal. There might be an appeal, and this is an issue that I think is just beginning to percolate. But we have an interesting dichotomy in the state where dash cam videos that relate to a criminal investigation are not public. Now you can try to get them under the common law, but that's a balancing test, and there's no fee shifting. So under OPRA, dash cam videos related to a criminal investigation are not public records, but body cam videos cannot be withheld as criminal investigatory records. Now, they might be withheld for other reasons, such as personal privacy, or maybe they get edited for personal privacy or some other reasons.
Domestic violence call.
Right, I think that's exactly right. I think that if you had a body cam audio and video of a responsible domestic violence incident, I think a judge would be hard pressed to order disclosure. But you capture a lot of stuff with body cams, and so one of the other things I would throw out there is, do we want to think of harmonizing the law regarding dash cams and the law regarding body cams? So right now they're treated differently, and again, the issue is percolating. And the problem is one of the reasons why we have this dichotomy is because it's hard to, there's a lot of tension. I know that police agencies and prosecutors, they would like to never see those audio and video recordings become public record. The prosecutor's offices especially, they treat everything that happens in their office as just sort of secret. Now it's loosened up a little since Lyndhurst, but not a lot. So again, I know there's sort of a lot of interest groups, but I think it's certainly something worth thinking about. How do we treat body cams? Because in my opinion, under current law, because there's an Attorney General guideline for body cams, but not one for dash cams, they're treated differently. And I'm not sure that that's really in the best interest of the public, but that's a thought I would throw out there.
I just want to mention on the body cam and the dash cams, what we're really talking about is an Attorney General directive that says that they must exist for the body-worn cams, and they must be maintained, and they don't have to be maintained for the dash cams. So that's the criteria of the criminal investigatory record. So the problem is we're relying too much, I think, on administrative grace. This is an Attorney General directive. We have an Attorney General who put that directive in. The next Attorney General, or the same Attorney General, could just reverse that directive. It's a directive. First, it's an Attorney General, a single person, writing something down on a piece of paper. It isn't a rule that goes to the Administrative Procedures Act as a formal rulemaking petition where there's public input, public hearing, all that stuff. It's essentially a directive. It's a letter from the Attorney General. The Attorney General could tomorrow say, this directive that made these body-worn camera videos, took them out of the criminal investigatory record exemption, that is repealed and it is no more. In which case, our right to these records will depend on what one Attorney General's opinion is. I think that a much better solution would be have a comprehensive legislative solution to what is and is not. And actually, I think we can almost do away with the criminal investigatory record exception altogether, because police agencies have other exceptions that are able to cover their legitimate needs, such as the ongoing investigation exception. Something that would impair an ongoing investigation should be kept confidential. As Walter mentioned, a personal privacy exemption, if someone for a medical call where someone has collapsed on the floor, maybe the person is not fair to put that person's image on the internet, or to be able to have it where it's in the public realm. So the idea is, I think, as I would hope, and I know the game keeps shifting and the court decisions come in, and I know the legislature can't act that quickly, but this is a very important issue. People have a lot of distrust of things that they're not allowed to see. And police have an awful lot of power. And police can do things that fundamentally and profoundly affect an individual's life. They carry guns, they can arrest people, they can apply up to deadly force against an individual. They have to, along with the power, they have to have an equal amount of responsibility and accountability to the public. And I think that most police officers do their jobs diligently and fairly. But when you have a situation where there is a police shooting, and there is a video that exists that will either exonerate that officer or will incriminate that officer, and you have an official telling the public, we have viewed the video and we have determined that the police officer acted appropriately, but you are not allowed to see the video. You need to take our word. We saw the video and we're telling you what that video said. I can't think of a better way, and they could be right, and they probably are, but when you deny the public that this is America, Americans want to be, they want to see the evidence. If you have the evidence, you're not allowing me to see it, I'm going to be suspicious. Most people are. That type of distrust can lead to civil unrest, and it does lead to civil unrest. Release the videos. If your officer did a good job, release the video, and everyone can see that, and the civil unrest will go down. But telling people they can't see videos that would give them the critical information they need to evaluate whether or not the police acted appropriately is, I think it's a dangerous policy to deny public those videos.
I think it's something we have wrestled with, and particularly with the court decisions. And I agree with you, there should be exceptions. As we talked about, somebody collapses on the floor, or a domestic violence issue, something involving a child. But generally speaking, I so agree with John. It's going to give the public confidence in their local governing bodies, their local law enforcement. So the more we can give out, the more we can share. I start out with the idea that everything should be public, with some exceptions built in for all the obvious reasons, whereas many of the people I'm dealing with start out with just the opposite. Everything should be confidential, with a few exceptions that we have to give to you. I just want to clarify in the fee shifting that John talked about. It is in the current OPRA law. You go into court, you prevail, you get your lawyer's fees paid. It is not in the current OPMA law, but in this new bill, we have put the fee shifting in for OPMA also. And as I said, whether it ends up staying there, it's going to be a big bone of contention in the legislature. But we had an issue just a few weeks ago in the town in which I live, Teaneck. Apparently, and I don't know the reasons, the town manager is leaving. I don't know whether it's something that was encouraged or both sides agreed to. They, without putting it on the agenda, a termination contract was discussed at the last Teaneck meeting. A contract was executed covering whatever monies they're going to pay to this person at the end of his employment. None of that was on the published agenda, and in fact, they passed it before there was any chance for public input. After they passed it, then the public had a chance to comment if they knew what it was that the council had just passed. The contract wasn't even there available. And this is, you're talking about, forget the personnel issues, you're talking about some big taxpayer money is going out. And I mean, it's just all been done backwards. But that would be a public meetings, that would fall under OPMA, and as John said, you're not going to find too many people who are going to want to take that case because of the cost of the litigation. So without fee shifting, nobody will take the case. So that kind of clarifies that.
Thank you, Senator. We had mentioned before that we wanted a discourse, the Senator's words, so if anyone has any thoughtful questions for us, and if it's a question I think that folks can't hear, I'll repeat it from up here. So, sir, I saw you first.
I live in a condominium, and this discussion sounds very much like my condominium.
So do I, and I go home to the same.
Can we make this law cover condominiums also?
It's generally treated as private. There's an agreement, whatever your bylaws say, unfortunately.
But there are some laws that cover condominiums.
And there's one in the house right now.
I'm sorry?
There's one covering this in the house right now. A new law coming
Well,
up.
I know, I've had the same, believe me when I tell you, when I do this all day long and then I come home to the place I live and get into exactly the same argument. So I have quoted the condominium law to them that requires some public voting, condominium board voting.
H2500.
Yeah, so that's an assembly bill, 2500, we'll take a look at it. But is it Assemblywoman Quijano, do you know? Who's the sponsor? You know? Okay, we'll take a look at that. But I know that all too well.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question on your township where they could sue for excessive OPRA requests. Do you feel that, especially if there's something going on in the town, some type of investigation or something that the citizens are concerned about, let's say, and there's an increase in OPRA, that the town would then use something like that in order not to provide the information in a time-sensitive manner to people that need it for that investigation? Or uncover things?
I don't believe towns would take people to court over issues like that. Now, maybe I'm being too optimistic or
I mean, and you
Pollyanna.
say they have that endless town
But-
taxpayers.
what we aimed to try to lessen is somebody who makes OPRA requests that don't seem to bear any resemblance to appropriate reasons. It's not like there is some issue going on in the community and they're making OPRA requests about that. It is just 100 OPRA requests a week with, I want all your documents on everything. I don't really believe that towns would do that. We've tried to craft this very carefully with the ACLU so that we're not stepping on anybody's constitutional rights. I could be proven wrong, but I also think the courts would act appropriately in defending the public's right to know. So it is really aimed at a specific class of people that do take up an inordinate amount of municipal clerks' time.
Would the amendment include excessive if it's not tied to a specific instance?
So the exact language is for the sole purpose of harassment.
Yeah.
So if you have any legitimate purpose, you'll be fine. But if it, the idea here is somebody who's really, right, also there's no, no real reason.
Yeah, that's the critical issue, and I remember that conversation, it was a couple of years ago now, but the language has survived, and the language says, if the request were made for the sole purpose of harassment, so theoretically, you could have partial purpose to harass, but have a partial legitimate purpose, then that wouldn't rise to the level of warranting relief.
Because then you're going to stop citizens from asking for the information or to uncover things that are happening within their community.
I mean, that's the chilling effect, and I think you're gonna see, if the amendment passes with that provision, I think you're gonna see a couple of test cases, and then you kind of have to see how it gets sorted out in the courts. It depends on how vigorously a court is willing to impose limitations. I mean, I can tell you the one case I'm aware of where it was just sort of like the craziest example, which is Caggiano out of Sussex County. I actually put in OPRA requests to see exactly what happened there. He was making a lot of OPRA requests, and the trial court judge in Morris initially said, look, I'm not going to ban you from filing OPRA requests. I'm going to put some limitations, and I think they're reasonable because I do think you have a First Amendment right to make OPRA requests. And they just kind of blew past and ignored all those limitations. And then at that point, they banned him from making OPRA requests. So I think that...
They banned him forever or for some specific length of time?
I don't remember if it was indefinite, but even then, he just continued doing them, so it just got completely out of control. My recollection is that it was a permanent injunction. Now, permanent injunctions, you always come back to court in a couple of years and ask for them to be modified, just like with the Meetings Act injunction. I think that if there has to be a remedy, sometimes it's a question of what's the right remedy, and maybe if the remedy is, well, one OPRA request a day, without multiple subparts. I think that if judges can be sort of careful about the remedy, then that might be a place where everyone can live happily. I'm going to try and go in the order that I saw the hands, so you, sir, then we'll report
Okay.
back.
If I understood the Senator's comments earlier, there's a proposal for the state to provide some website support. And was that primarily for helping towns archive documents and make them available?
Yes. The state would underwrite the cost of setting up a statewide website, and then any town that chooses to could have its own portal
Great.
on that website devoted to that town, and that's where just regular documents that you're not redacting. But the typical is set your annual budgets, your contracts with your attorney, whatever, are just automatically scanned and put on the website, and then any member of the public has access to that.
So in the context of the internet, has there been any discussion of improving notification systems?
Improving-
Notification, the ability for people to be alerted either on legal notice or even beyond that, just on agendas and things like that. Is there any discussion of...
Well, we are tightening up the requirements for notification on agendas and so on in the new OPMA.
And would that include electronically?
Yes.
Yeah. That's 21st century.
Sir, you have your hand?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the previous topic, and I think the bigger chilling effect is not that, I submit a bunch of OPRA requests and they take me to court and I lose. The bigger chilling effect is I put in some OPRA requests and they use that as a mechanism to stall and hold those documents from me. Now I've got to go hire a lawyer because now I'm being sued for requesting records. I think that's going to be the bigger chilling effect. They'll use it as a tool to dissuade people from submitting any OPRA request, or they challenge it and say, well, I'm going to take you to court. I don't have time. That means that what? I got to hire a lawyer, I got to take time off from work. I may just walk away from that request. I think that's the bigger chilling effect. I'm not afraid of losing in court because I submitted 10 requests. I'm afraid of it's going to cost me money. Now I got to pay for these. I got to pay to protect myself from asking a question.
I have like part B to that. It's like,
We're all in the same town, by the way.
What recourse does a citizen have, if any, if you request an OPRA request and the information you requested, they give you something really bizarre? It's not answering your question, or they'll come back, we don't have that information at all, or we have months, January to June, but not after that, or they tell you that they're going to charge you a fee of like $1,400 or some other arbitrary amount. Do you have to be tenacious and keep going back and forth for forever, or are they also allowed to charge you fees for certain information that they?
On part B, that's just a straight OPRA denial. If you ask for, I want this, I want bank statements for January through July, and they give you January through April, that's probably pretty close to a slam dunk OPRA case that you will win if you bring it before the Government Records Council or the Superior Court, and you will also more than likely get your attorney's fees paid for that.
But
I
you
have
still
that
have to
happen.
hire an attorney to do all this.
Yes, but the attorneys will, they will take the case typically at no charge. You don't, but most of the agreements are, the attorneys don't take every case. They select the cases that they're confident enough that they're going to win, because they know the mandatory fee shifting provision they will get paid. So the towns, in cases like where they give me half of what I asked for, usually it's a misunderstanding, and I'll go back and I'll say, look, I asked for what happened to May and June? And they'll say, oh, or maybe I'll send them to the municipal attorney and say, look, we can go to court on this if you want, but can't you just give me May to June? And they usually come around. The gentleman's question is a deeper question about what happens, and it's a chilling effect because you're going to get sued. That happens, that's not something or a concern that's just confined to OPRA. That's also a concern for people suing you for defamation of character. When you're up against a group of entrenched politicians that have run this town or this school board or this fire district like a family business for the last 35 years, they don't want to give up their power. That's one of the tactics they will use, is making you a defendant in something. You can call it it could be an OPRA case under the new bill if it gets passed. It could be defamation. It could be harassment and slap suit. But we already have rules that help us with that. And yes, when you enter into the rough and tumble of public discourse and you're going against these guys, a lot of them don't play very nice. But we have a rule called Rule 1:4-8 in the New Jersey Civil Rules that says that if someone filed a defamation claim against me and it was completely unfounded, I would go to a lawyer. They would send out, they'd have to go to a lawyer, but they would send out a 148 letter that would say, I demand that you withdraw this lawsuit because it is frivolous, and here's why. I never said these things, and even if I did, they don't amount to defamation or whatever it is. If they don't withdraw that lawsuit and you ultimately beat them, you ultimately prevail in the suit, the court is empowered under that rule to award you the attorney's fees that you had to expend
because of them not withdrawing the lawsuit that was later determined to be without merit. So you do have these options now under things like defamation. I know it's not pleasant, but that's what it is. There's always people filing frivolous lawsuits in order to shut down citizen inquiries. It's something that's not new, it's something that happens, and it's an unfortunate thing. And fortunately, there are remedies that can help you with that. Yes, it will be unpleasant for you, yes, you'll have to go out and get an attorney, but if they really did take a frivolous position and they really were trying to just shut you up, and they had no merit to their position, they're bullying you, I think that from my experience in the courts are pretty sensitive to that, and the courts are pretty fair about that, and you might end up getting them to pay your attorney's fees for everything that they did to you. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Now, I mean, lawsuits against OPRA requesters remain exceedingly rare. It happens less than once a year. So, of the tens of thousands of OPRA transactions that take place probably every month, you know, it's an extraordinarily rare event for a town to actually sue a requester. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it. I think you have to use a lot of honey. I think that, you know, I mean, I read a lot of OPRA requests. I read a lot of interactions between clerks and the public, and I think sometimes members of the public can be a little more formal than they ought to be. I think they can be a little. I think both sides can be a little edgy. I make OPRA requests all the time. I rarely, frequently, and I almost always get what I want because you know, I tend to be nice, tend to be cooperative. If they ask for extensions, I give them. If they miss stuff, I send them a polite note and say, hey, you gave me A and B, but you gave me C. And so I think sometimes you have to try, and sometimes with certain OPRA requests, it can be a process that lasts for months, where you're going back and forth with the clerk, especially if your requests span a lot of documents or maybe a period of years. So it can be a little, it can take a while to get the information you want. Sometimes you got to push. But I think if you're persistent and you use honey, I think most of the time you're going to get what you want, what you need. You haven't spoken, sir.
How you doing? First, I want to thank everybody for what you're doing, what you're trying to get done here. As far as the chilling effects that we're talking about, it can be, I feel, chilling, but I don't think it's, like you said, a big of an issue as we're kind of feeling that it is as advocacies for open government. Any type of restriction kind of gets the hair on the back of our neck standing up. But it sounds like they kind of already have the capability with the law currently to say, hey, we're inundated, we have too much, we can't handle it. So unless we see, unless we have seen that going forward and that getting more and more, I don't think it's going to really be an issue. In my personal
When we got the pushback from the municipalities, it was, yeah, sure, you think we're going to take any of our residents to court?
Right. So, yes.
So, I mean, they had the opposite. Like, you're not giving us enough because we're never going to do this anyway, because of the political fallout and public relations and so on, what that would look like. You know, I should have brought it with me, but Tina just lost another OPRA case in the last week or so. And it had to do with the municipal clerk asking for too many extensions on supplying documents. And the court ruled on behalf of the plaintiffs. I think it came out of some zoning issue.
That's a case I'm going to look up because
Yeah.
I'm always looking for guidelines about how many extensions are too many.
It's somebody versus Rappaport versus Tina, I think it is.
I will look that up in
Yeah.
courts tonight.
Yeah.
But it's tough. I know I'm talking a little bit, but you know, how many extensions are too many? I know Judge Jacobson, and I thought it was one of John's cases, but then I tried to look it up. I think it is. You know, in the 120 to 150 day range, Judge Jacobson and Mercer felt that was too much time in terms of extensions. On the other hand, you know, 30 to 60 days for extensions is generally viewed as reasonable It can depend on the document, but no, I'm very interested in hearing about this.
I know the name of the case, I could be
I'll look it
wrong,
up.
but I think that was the gist of it.
I just wanted to finish up, I want to finish with that, and as far as bringing this into the 21st century, I think that's a great idea, and it's definitely a great bill, but I would even like to see more, maybe a next phase of this, like, we have the prosecutor for criminal cases. Why can't we come up with an advocacy type of litigator for the public and create that position? So instead of us having to call NJFOG for issues where
You're
they're...
talking about a public advocate?
Correct.
We used to have one.
I know. But, with litigating, capabilities so that we don't have to hire our own lawyer to go after an OPMA or OPRA record issue.
The prosecutor's office is authorized to pursue civil actions for violations of the Meetings Act, but I'm pretty sure that's never been done.
Just done once.
One time, like an actual filing?
The prosecutor who filed it was Nicholas Bissell
Oh.
from Somerset County, and he filed it against a Greenbrook council person who had displeased him. That's my recollection.
You know what happened to him?
I know that. But there
That
was,
was show.
but it's only for knowing violations. The prosecutor isn't gonna, it has to be something like the councilman meeting at the local bar, knowing that they're discussing business, and the prosecutor might get involved in that. But they're able to levy fines, I believe, minimum of $100 and a maximum $500 fine. And a lot of prosecutors, it's another resource issue. They just don't want to put a whole lot of work into prosecuting somebody, some public official, and making them pay up to a $500 fine.
And there's a lot of political fallout.
Yeah, and there's a lot because the
That they're not
prosecutors,
going to.
they don't want to, they're kind of the constituency, I kind of wish they would, because I don't think it's the amount of the fine that bothers a public official. I know that I've had public officials fined for violating the local government ethics law. It infuriates them, and it's $100, but they don't send it in. They want to appeal it because they don't want to have it where their political opponent can say, Mayor Jones was found by the local finance board to have acted unethically, and because that doesn't look good to the electorate. So I wish the prosecutors would enforce some of these things more, and some prosecutors have been helpful in at least developing guidelines of what is acceptable behavior, especially around, I've had some success in getting prosecutors to say things about what is a meeting when you're dealing with email. I mean, when you're emailing each other, all the council members are emailing about an issue. When does this constitute a meeting? And
Shane, we have that covered, I think, too, correct?
I think so.
Well, I think it is generally accepted among attorneys who represent public agencies that they can email each other and have those discussions, and that's sort of routinely violated. The council members just ignore their attorney's advice. They look, you can't have conversations on email among all of you to discuss public issues.
Well, you can, but they're public documents.
Well, first of all, you're violating the Meetings Act. Second of all, you're creating public records. Yes.
I know of one town that has conference calls. The council has conference calls during the day from their places of work. They schedule conference calls, so it's not documented anywhere. They're not, what they've done.
Yeah, that's unlawful. It's a clear, if it's a quorum of the governing body, that's an obvious violation. Now, if you don't want to bring a lawsuit, just write a letter to the prosecutor's office, write a letter to the town attorney.
It's not like now, but.
Right. And the prosecutor, I've seen in a couple of counties, they'll send a letter. The prosecutor will send a letter, say, look, this has come to our attention. This is your obligation. Don't do it again. I mean, that does happen, and that can be very effective.
I actually contacted the county prosecutor, Ken, about one of the towns I represent, where minority members of the council came to me because the majority members of the council wouldn't give the other council people reports that they were entitled to.
Oh, that happens in our town.
So I went to it happened to be the outcome of the prosecutor's investigation. I went to the acting prosecutor, thinking that he probably wasn't going to be so quick to reply, and within 48 hours, he had a letter out to the mayor and the majority members, turn those documents over to the rest of the council. So, you know, where there are even cases like that, it's not the public, but the elected officials themselves who can't get access to the documents they need. The issue over minutes, we haven't really discussed it, but I served on my local council. I could not function, I don't think, appropriately if I didn't have the minutes of the prior meeting by the time I came to the next meeting, because that would refresh me on what we talked about, what programs we were waiting to hear further reports. Now we've got minutes that are literally months and months behind. And that is also addressed in here. I think we're setting two standards depending upon the size of the town by how quickly you have to have the minutes ready. I can't understand how a local council can function without that. And getting back to the fee shifting, when I tell many of my colleagues who've complained about this at the local level, if you give everybody everything they want, you don't have to worry about it. Because they're not taking you to court. And so fee shifting is irrelevant. In the town I live and work, we have lost, by my count, I think 4 OPRA or OPMA lawsuits that we, the taxpayers, pay the attorney fees for the plaintiffs. When some of them were so obvious documents, they should just handed over. And so that, you know, I agree with John about the fee shifting became the mechanism or the vehicle to make sure that the public's right to know was protected. And in addition, we haven't seen it with the new management too much, but the Bergen Record newspaper took a lot of these suits and won every single one of them, I think, you know, almost, without a doubt, so that it was proven if they had just said yes to begin with, they wouldn't have to worry about fee shifting.
Michelle?
Thank you for bringing up minutes. How about a little bit of a discussion about reasonably comprehensible minutes? Because if you get minutes, I think that's a big issue for the public. And even as, like you said, you were a public official, if you didn't have reasonably comprehensible minutes from the previous, how are you to move forward? So I think from my experience, it's been a very big issue with the public, and it's a constant battle to request from the secretaries or the public officials to have minutes. So if you can, and even some of the attorneys say things like, oh, it's enough if we just say we're going to go into contract negotiations, or it's enough if we just say, you know, you have 90 minutes of closed session, and then they come out and give you, in the minutes, 2 sentences. So that, I think, is critical, and how does the public really overcome that, or what is reasonably comprehensible? I think that's the big issue. That's the disconnect.
We've also, by the way, just before you answer, Walter, and I'll pass this over, in the bill, we're also requiring that of the legislature, of reasonably comprehensive minutes. So.
Minutes are not intended to be a verbatim recording of what happened at the meeting. And you said minutes, but you sounded like you were talking more about closed session minutes.
Well,
Right, and open session minutes, it's nothing really terribly controversial, frequently happens. So the question is, what level of detail should the law require in minutes? I mean, the Meetings Act says reasonably comprehensible, which means capable of being understood, as opposed to comprehensive. I mean, at the very least, the minutes should be sufficiently comprehensive, so that someone who wasn't at the meeting doesn't have to talk to someone who was at the meeting to learn what happened. I think that meeting, it's a little bit of an art. There's a big difference between writing in the minutes, the attorney gave advice regarding issue X, and quoting what the attorney said. I think there's a big difference. And I think that an artful writer will choose the former. They'll say the township attorney gave advice to the town council about issue X. The advice was considered, as opposed to saying what the advice was. Because I think you can have minutes that contain too much information. And remember, if there's a need to have attorney-client communication given and need to have it in writing, then just send a letter, send a memo. It doesn't have to be in the minutes. I think that you want to know, the minutes should describe what issues were discussed, were there votes, how much of the deliberation should be included. To be honest, I'm not sure. I think if the deliberations were sensitive or particularly important, then yes, there should be some of that. But ultimately it's a tricky issue. I think that right now you see a lot of variation among clerks. Some clerks are very detailed, some clerks are more middling, and then other clerks, it can be a one-line report. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong about one-line reports if the issues weren't terribly complex. So, I mean, ultimately the answer is it depends. I do think that sometimes minutes can be used as a tool to frustrate. There's simply not enough in there. What I would like to see is minutes that are reasonably detailed, but also minutes that become available over time. So, especially with executive session minutes, freshly minted minutes may not be ready for the public, but over time, the confidentiality drops off for most subjects. So I'd like to see situations where, executive session meeting minutes, they're approved within 30 days. And then as soon as they're approved, they're put on the internet. Maybe all you see is a redacted set, but then have quarterly or semi-annual or maybe even annual reviews of the prior minutes. Say, okay, issues X, Y, and Z have been resolved, now we can unredact them. Or maybe issue Z, that's a permanent redaction. So, maybe you're discussing someone's health.
Is it always, if an attorney is in the closed session, and is it always then that they have attorney-client privilege and they will never put that discussion out even when the issue is resolved?
I mean, it's a difficult question. I know several, most of the municipal attorneys that I've met, that I've spoken to about this, they say you never lose the privilege. The privilege exists forever, and if you waive it, then you risk losing the privilege as to all communications. So don't waive it. Personally, I think that the minutes should not reflect privileged communications. I think if there's a need to memorialize advice, it should be done in a separate memorandum. And the separate memorandum can be treated as privileged, then you know where the information is, and if there's ever a need for it down the road, the person who has the fiduciary relationship with the town, such as a township administrator or a clerk or a council member, they can look up the separate memorandum. I think that's, when it comes to attorney advice, I think it's more of a management. You've got to manage that communication a little differently. I think that the idea that the attorney is just sitting in a room and giving advice, and then that advice works its way into the minutes, I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think if action is taken based on advice, that should be reflected. So for example, after discussing the prospects of litigation with counsel, the counsel gave the attorney authority to settle at blank. And then that gets redacted, and maybe once the case is resolved, it gets unredacted. But if an attorney says, we have a 50-50 chance of losing this case, well, that doesn't really, personally, I don't think that belongs in the minutes. Because then you don't have to have a redaction issue. And like I said, if someone wants it memorialized, put in a separate memorandum. That's sort of where the art of minute taking comes in. Because if you have too much, I think you're doing a disservice as well, because then you just get a bunch of minutes that are redacted forever, and no one knows, what happened.
For the members of the council.
Well, now for the council.
Well, there are municipalities, many more, I think, that record both video and audio, or video or just audio, record their whole meetings. Again, in the town in which I live, they're broadcast online in real time. The question becomes, can the council now say, okay, we don't have to do minutes because you have the recording?
Well, the whole point of minutes is that you don't have to listen to the 3-hour recording.
Yeah, I agree with
I think
you,
made
but
the point.
that has already come as an issue. Well, the clerk doesn't need to take minutes anymore. Well, you know, if you, a member of the public, want to find out, or do you want to sit through the whole 3-hour council
But
meeting
not everybody
again?
has access to.
So, but that's going to be the next.
But
Discussion.
actually, Senator, if I may, the opposite is my concern. If
I get that.
if you have a video of the meeting and it's available, first of all, I think it should be available on a night.
It's called for in here.
Okay, but the second part of that is if the municipality or school boards approves minutes that are so limited compared to the video, what is considered the official minutes? So if I have an issue, let's say, and there's a videotape of it and I have that recording, but the official minutes, if I have to move forward with some either litigation or other questions, and they're saying, well, no, these very, very limited minutes are the official one, can I rely on the video to say, no, other things happened? See, that's what my concern is. They so reduce the approved minutes that are voted on, that does that exclude going back to the video and saying, no, this is really what occurred?
It doesn't exclude your going back to the video.
No, but I'm talking about if you have an issue in court.
I believe that the legislation uses the term comprehensive now, is that correct, Senator? Not comprehensible, but rather comprehensive minutes have to be taken, so, and recorded. So I think there's been a change in the legislation that is significant, at least for now, as long as the legislation gets passed. Otherwise, we're still relying on the term comprehensible as opposed to comprehensive.
I think we use the term comprehensive.
I think it is used, I thought I saw it in the bill.
I think it was comprehensive. Which hopefully leads to comprehensible.
Prakash Paul from Monroe Township. I have a question. The last 8 months, a lot of drama, or what do you call, went on in Board of Education in Monroe Township. We were surprised in November last year that our superintendent contract will not be renewed. He himself announced that he's going to, resign or whatever after July. And it came as a surprise to the public. And after that, whenever we asked a question in the Board of Education, the answer was, it is under litigation and we cannot answer it. So we read the laws of the New Jersey education and we started asking simple question. Did you follow the laws of New Jersey education system, blah, blah, laws? And the answer was, we cannot comment. And we went on questioning and ultimately the facts came out. And they are recorded. The facts came out and the action was taken without the consent of the Board of Education by the President, okay? So she did commit and she did answer that she took action on her own, but the minutes are not written in that way. So tomorrow, now the litigation is filed last month. We came to know that superintendent has filed the litigation. So we said, I said that if the litigation is filed, it will be discussed in the court. We as a public should know when the court deliberations are going to be there, so we want to be there. So my question is, in the court, The minutes will count, or the videotape which is taken, those facts will count. My question to you.
It's pretty much
I mean,
my question.
I mean, look, I think the question is how much information is the public agency required to give to us about decisions they make and pending litigation, and then decisions they make about pending litigation. And I mean, look, when it comes to litigation in public agencies, it's very tricky because there's lots of different ways that public agencies handle litigation. You can get litigation that's handled by someone who has a long-standing relationship with the town or the board, and they just handle litigation because they've been doing it for 10 or 20 or 30 years. You can have the litigation might be handled by an insurance company counsel, and that insurance company counsel could have a range of authority that could range from insurance company counsel can do whatever they want, including settle, even without the authority of the public agency, all the way to the public agencies with specific authorities required to settle any matter or bring it to trial. So it's very hard to give you an answer, because when it comes to litigation, I don't want to say you're on an island, but it's really, if you know that there's litigation out there, first of all, it's the right answer for the public agency not to talk about it, because there's litigation. That's what's in their interest. That's what's in the taxpayers' interest. But especially today, if you have most types of civil litigation that are in state court or federal court, you can go online. Now, in federal court, it's going to cost you a little bit of money to get the documents. But you can, I mean, John, you may be able to speak to this. John does this all the time. John tracks cases in court. He even calls up, don't let me speak for you too much, but he reaches, he has a question about a case. There's a hearing on Thursday. He calls up Wednesday afternoon. Is the hearing still on? I mean, it's work, but unfortunately, you kind of have to do that work. If you're in and Lakewood is what it is in terms of litigation. They have their share of litigation. It's on you to track it. It's on you to learn how court systems work and how court systems track litigation. And unfortunately, the law doesn't require the board or any public agency to answer those questions. You say, well, when's the next time this case is being heard? They might. The board members and the town council, they may not even know the answer. They may not even know how to get the answer. So unfortunately, when it comes to litigation, it's really on the public to learn to, and John's done this, to develop the tools and the skills that are necessary to track litigation. And frankly, I think it's much easier to do it today because you have e-courts, you have PACER, e-courts, state, PACER, federal, where you can go online. Well,
you can make an OPRA request.
E-courts, well, that's the other thing. Make your OPRA request. I want a copy of the complaint.
I want a copy of every complaint that is currently active against the township or any of its employees, and they will send them to you. Or I would like to have a first page of every copy of every complaint. So they send you the first page, you look through and see, oh, that's a slip and fall. That's not too interesting. Oh, there's a whistleblower complaint filed by the township manager. Well, I want to read that. And then you put these things on your calendar. That's exactly what I do. I track these things for years. And finally, there's always a settlement, and there's usually a confidentiality agreement. I mean, there's a concerted effort being done to keep you in the dark. This isn't just for chance, but there's a reasonable amount just with a reasonable amount of work, you could find every lawsuit, if you're in Lakewood, against the township, against the school board, everyone that's been settled or disposed of in the last year, and you can put these things on a calendar. You can go into the ACMS, which is the state system, or the PACER, which is the federal system. You can see when the hearings are going to be. You can put Facebook events. There's going to be a hearing in front of Judge Tracone on 2 days from now, at which this a motion for summary judgment will be decided. And it is work, but that's part of the civic responsibility of interested citizens, is to use those tools. And on my blog, I have articles on exactly how to use those tools so that you can get what you want. And very soon, the e-courts in New Jersey is going to be open to the public, where you can not only find out the names. I would use the ACMS to find out identify the cases. You can go to e-courts and put the docket number up. From the moment it's filed, it's a public document, and you can actually download a PDF right for free from your home. That'll be October 1st is the rollout of that. So these are good times. and you can find out what your town's being sued for.
Yeah, so I mean, if you can overcome, I mean, as an attorney in civil litigation, there's actually very few limits on the types of information that I can file publicly. You know, I can't include someone's driver's license number, active financial account numbers, and maybe like 6 or 7 types of information in run-of-the-mill civil litigation. I'm not talking about family, I'm not talking about abuse and neglect. The civil litigation, the kind that public agencies usually get involved in, there's very few limits. So if you can overcome those initial barriers to entry to getting the information, just getting the docket number is a big deal, because once you get the docket number, you know, you can call up chambers, be nice. What's the status of this case? Call the clerk's office, visit the clerk's office, always be polite. And yes, there are barriers to getting the information, but once you learn how the system works, you can get it. Frankly, relying on yourself to get it is a lot more effective than asking questions. You go to town hall, you ask a question. Like I said, you might end up knowing more about how to access the information than the folks at town hall or Board of Ed do.
I've had times where cases have been settled, and I publish on my blog, and I have received information that the actual sitting members of the Township Committee that were involved, they did not know about it because they were not informed, because the Joint Insurance Fund just handles it. And in other words, the lawsuit comes into the clerk sends it to the Joint Insurance Fund, the JIF, they handle it, and nobody is ever informed of the outcome of the lawsuit, which is crazy, because a lot of these, especially these are police excessive force lawsuits, the public, the township council people need to know if this individual officer has maybe been involved in 3 of these cases in 2 years. So yeah, it's important that we point these, one of the most important things citizens can do is look at the litigation being filed against their town, and it shows an awful lot about your town.
Go to someone, John.
John Schmidt, I have both a comment and a question on the board of directors of NJFOG. We're closing up, we only have 9 more minutes. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight. We're a volunteer-driven organization. We are fortunate enough to put on events like this through donations. So kindness of your heart, if you'd like to make a donation to FOG, we'd be very appreciative. I wanted to bring up, we were at the hearing, myself and Fran Brooks, with Senator Weinberg and other supporters and opponents when the OPMA and OPRA bills were in front of the State Government Committee. And what I took away from it was my senator sits on the committee, Nelson Cruz-Perez, from the 5th Legislative District, and that one of the municipalities in the district, Sept Township, both their clerk and their mayor tried to throw a huge wrench into it. And subsequent to that, we actually filed an OPRA lawsuit against Sept Township right after the hearing almost, because they didn't respond to our OPRA request. They just really didn't want to respond. They said, go online. We said the records weren't online. And we discovered that the town at one point didn't improve minutes for a 6-year period, among other deficiencies. They were really aggressive in fighting against any type of reform to make OPRA and OPMA better. In the months ahead, or even the weeks ahead, depending on how quick this goes, what is the biggest challenge that we face as people who want to see reform? Or what ways can we be most helpful to combat those who don't want to see anything and would like to see these bills die and never move forward? I guess maybe that's to the Senator, but also to John and Walter, as you know.
Well, I think I addressed that earlier. First of all, you should all be talking to your own legislators, both Senate and Assembly, with as many voices as you can. Telephone calls, personal meeting, letters, postcards. As I said, I mean, I will, every time I bring this up, I go, oh, please, not again. Even the good parts, or what I would consider the good parts to help the bureaucracy deal with all of this. So certainly lobbying through your through your own legislators. I think the two biggest issues in the bills that we will be fighting is the fee shifting and OPMA and the subcommittee portions. Those seem to have caused the most discussion or pushback. Fee shifting is obvious why the public jurisdictions would be against it, and the subcommittee because I think they've been doing more and more business by subcommittee. And it's definitely under the radar screen, so those are the two big issues, certainly, and I think John pointed out, I'm not so sure, we have press in the room here? Yes or no? Is there? No? Oh, somebody walked in looking like they had a reporter's pad. I was going to say, I'm not so sure about the fee shifting because I don't know if I want to call too much attention to it if people aren't concentrating on it. So that's, you're smiling, Shane. I don't know if you agree with me about that.
It wouldn't be the first time we de-emphasized important parts of
Yeah.
think back to equal pay, particularly.
That's true, and the equal pay, we got them concentrating on some other things that enabled us to get some pretty important aspects through without notice. So there's a certain amount of little art form in politics, I'll use your term of art form, comes into play here. But certainly talking about the subcommittees, or just talking about, listen, it'll make life easier if everybody technologically gets into the 21st century and just put this stuff online and everybody will be happy. Your clerk will not be standing at the copy machine and will not have to deal with you on a personal level because it'll all be there.
On that note, I know we have to, I think we have a closing time of 8:30, we have room until 8:30, and we have to break stuff down. So I wanted to invite the audience to thank our guests, and I thank our guests. And we have a website, where we have a tremendous amount of information on our website. You can sign up for email alerts. You can donate, as John said, and we have a lot of different sections. John's written some of them, I've written some of them, that have more detailed information about the Meetings Act and the Records Act. And thank you again.